I'm worried about Gears 5. I made a similarly titled video a few weeks ago concerning Halo Infinite, and I have to say Microsoft's other flagship title has me feeling a similar kind of way, albeit for different reasons. Now, I'm aware that these types of videos tend to ruffle some feathers. Nobody likes having their hype challenged for a new game. Hey man, why don't you just stop complaining, just enjoy the game? Well, I'll enjoy the game if it's good. And while Halo Infinite has me worried because it's going to be a really important game for the franchise, and it's been 4 years since the last one and we still haven't seen anything, Gears 5 has me worried, well, because I just played it. And we'll start with the main mode they were highlighting throughout this tech test, and that's the new arcade mode. Now, on one hand, despite the fact I don't like it, because it's its own separate mode, its overall damage to the game is going to be nullified. However, I do feel like it's going to fail to accomplish the job it was designed to fulfill. The Coalition has been very open about arcade being a place that is more welcoming to players who maybe aren't familiar with how Gears of War works. It's a very unique game with a lot of depth in its mechanics, and the Nasher shotgun, which you traditionally start with, is a key component to the Gears identity due to the gameplay it encourages. And the feeling is that this is very different from what most players expect. Polygon recently had an interview with Gears 5's multiplayer design director Ryan Clevin, and here's some quotes that clearly show this is something they considered and attempted to design arcade for. Gears is that kind of game that whenever I go into it, I get shotgunned in the face and I don't know why, Clevin said, mimicking the complaints of a traditional FPS player. Arcade is an experience that might be more familiar to you, and I'm sure it is. They've removed the Nasher from the starting weapon pool. They've added hero classes with unique abilities and a mid-game progression system that allows you to unlock weapons throughout the match, not unlike Infinity Slayer from Halo 4. And this distribution method replaces weapons on map, so map control is completely de-emphasized. It is basically a gear skin of a hero shooter, and I didn't like it very much. Now, thankfully, this is not an overarching system across all of the modes in Gears of War 5, and the tech test did offer ranked modes that gave that old Gears gameplay you know and love, and while not perfect, those were certainly better. However, arcade mode still has me worried and makes me question some of the philosophy that the Coalition has regarding this franchise. But most importantly, I think it's going to fail to do what they want it to do. In the same article I referenced earlier, Clevin says this: with Gears 5, we feel comfortable that we've proven ourselves, and we want to make our mark on multiplayer and do a bit of a departure from what Gears has traditionally done. And this really manifests inside arcade, which is to try to de-emphasize just the singularly shotgun play to bring out a much more diverse combat experience. End quote. Issue 1. I hate when companies talk about the necessity to change and keep things fresh and take risks and make their own mark and then proceed to just take something from another game and put it in theirs. That's not fresh. You're not offering a new experience. You're not doing anything new. Just because it's new in Gears doesn't mean it's new for all the players you're trying to bring in. And just because it's new in Gears, that doesn't mean the people who already play Gears aren't already going to be bored with it from having experienced it in 100 other shooters they've also played. And keep in mind, they're playing your game for a reason rather than those other ones. If you change something or add something to make the game fresh, but your method of doing so is to copy other games, then you're actually doing the opposite. And yet that is the excuse that is given time and time again for these sorts of instances. Issue number 2. You speak of this departure from a singularly shotgun-focused game and choose to emphasize a more diverse experience that is more welcoming to traditional players of FPS games. But really all you've done is shifted the focus rather than expanding it. Now, automatic weapons dominate. You can only get the shotgun via certain characters and via a currency system that you earn throughout the match. And this is how you earn your power weapons as well, rather than controlling them via on-map pickups. Now, the problem is the gameplay that the Nasher promotes is actually interesting, and the gameplay automatics promote is not, at least not where this franchise is concerned. And even though, again, it's just one mode for the casual players, it's not going to bring them in my opinion. Not only because they can get this style of game in 100 other places already, but because even if they liked it, it's not indicative of what the Gears experience actually is. The Nasher promotes aggression. You have to get up close, and at a high level play, the cover system becomes less about actually using it for cover and more so utilizing it as a movement system. The shotgun promotes and incentivizes this style of play, and it is a massive part of the Gears of War identity. Arcade promotes the opposite. Arcade tends to punish aggression. The player who posts up usually has the advantage, and the movement is, while not removed per se, certainly less incentivized. So say you get new players to try arcade and they enjoy it, you've set a false expectation for how the game actually is played, and anytime they explore other modes beyond arcade, they will be exposed to a completely different experience despite having learned through the same game to play a different way, and would thus have to unlearn to learn again rather than just start at stage 1 and naturally progress. I fear the arcade mode is going to act as a bubble rather than an entry point. Additionally, to accompany this, automatics seem tuned to do way too much damage. They can also kill you outright with a headshot rather than bringing you down, and it feels like despite classic gears being present, the game is trying to fight against it at the same time. To me, rather than having a separate mode, it's best to have all players exposed to the same game and learn under the same rules. What separates you is how far you can grow and get better within those rules. I feel like Gears of War already had the pieces for that progression to take place. Every player starts most likely playing it like a traditional cover shooter. Were the game to have an exceptional ranking system, then these types of players could start out playing each other. As you grow and learn, you begin to get exposed to better players who understand a bit more. Maybe you run into some Smurfs who absolutely obliterate you, and that triggers something in your mind. How do they do that? And why is that so much more effective than me standing still behind this pillar taking pot shots with my Lancer? You start playing more aggressive. You lean on your Nasher more. You get better. You start playing with people who do the same. Next thing you know, you learn about wall bouncing, and you start implementing that, and you begin to see the game in a different way. Cover is no longer just cover, they are opportunities for movement, and it is all facilitated by the Nasher shotgun, which is not one-dimensional like some people mistakenly say. It is literally integral to the game's identity. It is completely unique. There is not a single game on the market that offers what Gears of War offers, and these dynamics are responsible for that. That's a really special thing to have. So build around that. Build around what makes your game unique. Build things that make people want to invest and reach those levels rather than building things that contradict that experience or set a false expectation for what that experience is. Make them want to learn your game, not build a segregated experience because you don't trust them to get it. And this is coming from someone who originally wasn't all the way on board with some of this crazy stuff, but I've come to see it as a really unique aspect of Gears that should be cherished because it's very unique and you can't get it anywhere else. Again, it is a separate mode. Thankfully, traditional Gears modes will be present, but I also have some worries about the core experience as well. I didn't mind Gears 4. It might have been one of the weaker games in the franchise, but to me, it was still Gears of War. And having gone through what I've gone through with Halo and that game not even feeling like the same series, I was happy enough that the Coalition, while not improving on hardly anything, they didn't royally fuck anything up either. It didn't have an identity crisis. It was still Gears, just kind of a less interesting version. And I was okay with that being their first attempt. But in Gears 5, I don't see that next step being taken either, despite what they say. Despite the constant talk of taking risks, I always felt like the first 3 Gears games did a great job of innovating. Not necessarily in regards to balancing all of the new things they added, sure as hell, not in regards to balancing, but in regards to making significant additions all while keeping the core intact. In those sequels, we'd see modes like Horde introduced and later expanded on, which is now a defining feature of the game. New weapons were interesting and offered unique opportunities, like the Digger, which burrowed underground and popped up in front of enemies, or the Boom Shield, which you could hold or plant in the ground for portable cover. This in addition to standouts the series has had from the get-go, like the laser-targeted Hammer of Dawn, the Nasher, which we've already praised throughout this video, and of course the Lancer with its chainsaw bayonet. It also introduced new mechanics, but rather than taking them from other games, they looked at what made Gears unique and expanded on those elements, adding the ability to pick players up as a meat shield, for instance, and then later games built on that, allowing you to stick a meat shield with a grenade and kick them into other players. Rather than trying to make Gears like other games, they focused more on adding on to the already well-established identity Gears started with. And their map design. Gears is a grounded, cover-based shooter, and there's certainly limitations that puts on you in regards to designing spaces, but Gears still made it interesting. They'd create these wonderfully flavorful, interactive, and dynamic maps. Avalanche in Gears of War 2 would have a mid-match event where an actual avalanche would dump snow onto the play space and actually change the level layout by blocking some areas and adding access to new ones. Or in Gears 3's Thrashball map, you could shoot the scoreboard to drop it on top of a power weapon spawn, killing anyone underneath while also creating additional cover in the middle of the map. Or Bullet Marsh, which featured a generator that controlled the lights on the map. These lights shined on top of both the sniper spawns as well as the boom shot. If you shot it and the lights went off, the krill enemy from the campaign would swoop in and kill anyone who was stuck there when the lights went down. And I'm not here to say all of these things were amazing or that they got the balance right every single time, but one thing you can say about those old Gears games, whether it be the map design, the weapons, the new abilities, or the modes, they all had character. The innovations they added were exciting and flavorful and had character. Gears 4 was really missing a lot of that, and Gears 5 isn't doing a lot in my mind to turn that around. You look at Coalition's new maps, and aside from a very rare dynamic element here and there, they're just static, fairly bland collections of shapes. Just a bunch of textured boxes organized and spread, typically in a symmetrical manner. Clearly focused more on being non-disruptive to the competitive scene than actually being interesting play spaces to fight in. Not necessarily bad, but lacking in a lot of the character we spoke on. Both maps in Gears 5's tech tests seem to follow that same trend. You look at the Coalition's weapons in Gears 4 and 5, a generic SMG in the Enforcer, the automatic Talon pistol, like we didn't already have the Gorgon, the Tri-Shot, like we didn't already have the Mulcher. Again, you look at the new guns the Coalition has added and they're lacking a lot of character. They fill spaces that were already filled with only a few numerical changes here and there, leading to a lot of redundancy. And even some of the newer guns that do have some interesting aspects to them, they tend to still occupy roles that other guns filled. Like instead of the Digger shooting subterranean creatures that eat through the ground and jump up and explode when they reach an opponent, the Drop Shot shoots a bomb through the air that you can drop on your opponent instead. Though I'll admit this is an instance where I like the flavor of the Digger better, but the functionality of the Drop Shot more. And we've come full circle back to modes. The old Gears games literally couldn't help themselves but go against the grain and do something different. CTF, Gears of War had submission, where instead of capturing a flag, you had to capture an NPC that ran around the map and blasted you with a shotgun. And in Gears 3, they said, fuck it, let's have players capture each other, where a player was chosen as the objective that the other team had to find down and hold as a meat shield. Fan favorites like Guardian and Execution, which meant you could only kill down players via certain methods. This mode probably had a lot to do with encouraging the gameplay Gears is now famous for. And even when Gears 3 finally added a standard deathmatch years into the lifespan of the series, they couldn't help but add a unique twist where lives counted down and everyone got one last life to have a last stand and potentially end in a tense elimination style fashion. Contrast that with Gears 5 and their new premiere mode, their mark on multiplayer. It's a first to 50 regular team deathmatch with heroes and Infinity Slayer weapon drops. Wow. Now, to be fair, Dodgeball from Gears 4 is one of my personal favorites, and I hope it's in Gears 5. But in regards to new modes, Gears 5 hasn't really shown us anything on the level of what the series has offered before. And while they're pushing this new escalation mode as the competitive multiplayer mode of the game, it's just an overcomplicated version of Territories. And while I won't speak on the quality of it here, all I'll say is it's not the best mode to feature in a tech test where most people are just trying to get in and learn the game. My point about all of this is that Gears 5 may very well be passable, serviceable, and provide some of those raw moments that only Gears can, and there will certainly be things to enjoy about it. Gears doesn't have an identity problem. It may not be tuned or balanced right at this stage. I'm not a fan of how automatics function in regards to their effectiveness. I'm not a fan of some of the clunkiness I experienced with the movement. Hopefully that'll get tweaked for the final game, but at the end of the day, it's still Gears of War. It still has its identity, and that's very important, and it should cherish it and protect it because it's unique in a very special series. But the Coalition Gears games don't have a lot of character, and in my short weekend with Gears 5, I got the indication that that would be a trend we'll see in the final game as well. I'm not 100% sure. I'm hoping once we see the whole game, it'll blow us away. Maybe there's a bunch of cool maps and modes that are waiting for us. Maybe Escape won't suck. Maybe Horde mode won't be riddled with intrusive microtransactions, and maybe the campaign will be above average. But based on this slice of gameplay, I'm worried. Not worried about whether or not we'll be getting a real Gears game, but worried about whether we're getting a good one. Till next time.